The first thing Rowan Bell noticed was not the village, nor the cottage, nor even the quiet. It was the light. It lay across the land as if it had arrived early and decided to stay too long, stretched thin and pale, without warmth. The sort of light that made colors look honest but wrong, as though nothing had been given permission to hide. Rowan stood beside her car, keys still in her hand, and waited for the moment when her body caught up with itself after the drive. That was when she realized something was missing. She looked down. The grass beneath her boots was pale and dry, pressed flat by weeks without rain. Pebbles glimmered faintly like bone. But there was no dark shape at her feet. No echo of her form. She lifted her hand. The light shifted. The ground did not answer. For a long moment she simply stood there, heart beating too loudly in her ears, trying to decide whether to laugh or to step back into the car and drive away without another thought. Eventually, she laughed, softly, nervously, and told herself what everyone tells themselves in moments like this. I'm tired. It's been a long day. The light is strange. Still, she stepped back. Her shadow slid into place as though it had never gone. Rowan did not tell anyone about that first moment. She would later realize that the field had noticed her silence. Harthwaite was the kind of village that did not announce itself. You arrived without quite knowing when. Hedgerows closing in until houses appeared as if they had always been there and you had simply failed to notice them before. Rowan had grown up in places like this. Places where nothing seemed to happen, and yet everything did, quietly and without witnesses. Her Aunt Margaret's cottage sat at the far edge of the village, beyond the last street lamp, where the land opened outward into a broad, open field. The field. It was impossible not to look at it. Not because it was beautiful, it wasn't, but because it was empty in a way that did not belong to the countryside. No fence cut across it. No animals grazed there. Even the grass seemed thinner, paler, as though it had learned not to take up space. The solicitor had cleared his throat when Rowan asked about it. The house is yours, he said. And the land. What land? Rowan asked, though she already knew. The field, he replied. Your aunt was particular about it. Particular how? He hesitated, fingers tapping the folder. She asked that it not be sold. Ever. Rowan had nodded then, distracted, grief-heavy. Now, standing at the cottage window, she understood that Margaret had not been sentimental. She had been vigilant. The village pub smelled of old wood and polite avoidance. Rowan ordered a drink and listened, to weather complaints, to talk of sheep, to a story about a broken gate that somehow took 10 minutes to tell. When she finally asked about the field, the room did not fall silent dramatically. It thinned. Words slowed. Eyes shifted. A man near the window said, carefully, "That field's not for walking." Rowan smiled, casual. "It's just grass." A woman beside him shook her head. "It's never just grass." Someone laughed, too loudly, and changed the subject. No one contradicted her. That was worse. Margaret's note lay where Rowan found it that evening, waiting on the kitchen table as if it had always known who would read it. The paper was thick, the handwriting steady. If you're reading this, you've already noticed the field. I'm sorry you had to see it before you were ready. Do not stand in the center. Do not go at noon. And if your shadow ever disappears, leave. Rowan read the note 3 times. Then a fourth. She folded it carefully and placed it back on the table, hands trembling just slightly. Outside, the light did not change. Rowan did not mean to walk to the field the next morning. She told herself she was just stretching her legs, just learning the shape of the place. But her feet carried her to the boundary all the same, stopping where grass met grass in a way that felt more like a threshold than a line. Up close, the field shimmered faintly, not visibly, but perceptibly, like standing near heat without feeling warm. Rowan extended her foot. Her shadow followed, until it didn't. It stopped at the edge, sharp and complete, while her body leaned forward alone. The sensation was immediate and visceral, like stepping off a curb you hadn't seen. Rowan staggered back. Her shadow snapped into place again, obedient, whole. She stood breathing hard, staring at the empty stretch of land, understanding for the first time why Margaret had walked the boundary every evening. Some things were not meant to be crossed. Some things measured you as much as you measured them. The old shepherd found her there that afternoon, leaning on the stile as if he had always been part of it. "Margaret warned you," he said kindly. Rowan startled. "You knew her?" He nodded. "She did the watching. Before her, someone else. And before them, another." "Watching what?" He gestured toward the field. "People," he said. "Mostly themselves." Rowan frowned. "What is it?" The shepherd considered her carefully. "It's a place folk bring what they don't know how to finish," he said at last. "Regret. Grief. The lives they almost lived." "And the land?" Rowan asked. The shepherd's mouth tightened. "The land learned how to keep things still." That night, Rowan dreamed of standing in the field. The light was endless. The grass brushed her calves softly. Around her stood others, men, women, children, all calm, all present, all unmoving. No fear, no pain, just rest. When she woke, the village was in an uproar. A woman had not come home. Last seen walking near the field. Days passed. Rowan read Margaret's journals slowly, reverently. They were not dramatic. They did not plead. They observed. The field doesn't take. One entry read. It offers. That's why it's dangerous. Margaret had written about shadows, about noon light, about names that faded when choice was reclaimed. She had loved Rowan fiercely, Rowan realized, enough to stay, enough to resist, enough to become part of the boundary rather than the center. At noon, the field changed. The light sharpened, flattening everything it touched. Rowan stood at the edge, heart racing, as something brushed her thoughts. Not a voice, not words. "You are tired." She was. "You have carried things that were never fair." She had. Her shadow thinned. Just slightly. In the field, Margaret appeared, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as herself, calm and whole. "It's quiet here," Margaret said. "You don't have to ache anymore." Rowan sobbed. "I don't want peace that costs me motion," she whispered. The light flickered. Rowan stepped back. The field resisted, not with force, but with sorrow. Her shadow dragged, then snapped into place. The brightness dimmed. The woman who had gone missing returned the next morning, shaken but alive. Others followed. Margaret's shape faded. The field exhaled. Rowan still walks the boundary. Not as a guard, As a reminder, the field remains, pale, tempting, patient. It will always ask. But now, it does not hold as tightly. And every day, Rowan looks down at her feet and watches her shadow move with her. Choosing. Rowan Bell did not leave the field alone after that first strange morning. Even when she turned away, even when the cottage door closed behind her, even when she lay awake in Margaret's narrow bed listening to the quiet tick of cooling pipes, the field remained with her, not as an image, but as a pressure. A presence that did not intrude, did not demand, but waited with the patience of something that had learned time differently. Grief did that, Rowan knew. It changed the shape of waiting. She lay on her back and stared at the ceiling, remembering other places where she had paused her life without realizing it. The flat she'd stayed in too long because moving felt exhausting. The job she hadn't left because leaving meant admitting it wasn't coming back to life. The relationship that had ended quietly, not with anger but with mutual fatigue. The kind that left no sharp memory, only a dull sense of having missed something important. The field knew all of this. She felt certain of it. Not because it spoke, but because it didn't need to. In the mornings, Rowan brewed tea and stood at the window, watching the way the light lay across the grass. Sometimes it looked ordinary, dew sparkling, insects lifting and settling, the subtle ripple of wind. Other mornings it looked thin, as though the world had been stretched too far and might tear if handled roughly. She tested herself without meaning to. She would step into the sunlight and check the ground. Pause. Shift her weight. Lift her hand. Each time, her shadow returned faithfully. Each time, relief arrived, followed closely by disappointment she did not want to name. That was when Rowan began to understand something that unsettled her deeply. The field did not only tempt despair. It tempted rest. People came back changed. That was what the village noticed first. The woman who had disappeared returned with dirt beneath her fingernails and a blankness behind her eyes that slowly, over days, softened into confusion. She could not explain where she had been, only that she felt as though she had been stood somewhere bright for a very long time. Others returned quieter than before, kinder, sometimes, slower, and a few did not return at all. No one searched for them, not because they didn't care, but because everyone understood, on some deep, unspoken level, that the field did not take people unwillingly. It waited until they leaned forward. Rowan walked the boundary at dusk the way Margaret once had. Not pacing, not guarding, just walking slowly, deliberately, letting her footsteps mark time. She spoke aloud sometimes, not to the field, exactly, but to the space between herself and it. "I'm still choosing," she would say. Or, on harder nights, "I don't know what I want yet." The field shimmered faintly in response, like a held breath. Rowan noticed that when she spoke honestly, not bravely, not optimistically, just honestly, the air seemed to relax. When she lied to herself, even gently, the light sharpened. There were moments, long ones, when the offer felt unbearably kind. On those evenings, she sat on the stile and imagined what it would be like to step forward and stop feeling the constant ache of unfinished things. To stand in that endless brightness where nothing demanded becoming, improving, deciding. No aging, no regret, no explanations, just stillness. The field did not promise happiness. It promised relief. And Rowan understood why Margaret had stayed as long as she did. Why she had taken the role of watcher rather than leaving outright. To guard something that offered rest was harder than guarding something that threatened harm. Sometimes, Rowan dreamed of shadows. Not frightening dreams, just slow ones. She dreamed of walking across the field while her shadow lagged behind, stretching thinner and thinner until it remained at the boundary, watching her go. In the dream, she always turned back. But waking carried its own unease. What if one day she didn't? At noon, the field grew most dangerous, not because it did anything, but because it simplified everything. Under that flat, unforgiving light, Rowan's thoughts narrowed. All the complexities of her life, the reasons she stayed, the reasons she left, the way grief tangled itself into habit, reduced to a single question. Why keep moving if stopping feels so much easier? Her shadow grew faint at noon. Not gone, but hesitant. Rowan learned to leave the cottage at those hours, to walk into the village, to anchor herself among noise and people and small, irritating inconveniences. Life, she discovered, was an antidote. One afternoon, standing at the boundary, Rowan spoke aloud the thing she had not admitted even to herself. "I'm afraid that if I keep going," she said, voice low, "I'll never arrive anywhere that feels finished." The field shimmered. Not brighter, softer, and Rowan felt, not heard, an answer that was not cruel, but true. Nothing living is finished. She sat down hard in the grass and laughed through tears. Margaret appeared one final time at dusk, not whole this time, not solid. Just an impression. A kindness. "I stayed so you wouldn't have to," Margaret had said. Rowan understood now that it was not a sacrifice born of despair, but of love sharpened by awareness. Margaret had stood between the field and the village, not to defeat it, but to slow it down, to give people time to choose. And now Rowan carried that same slowing. The field still exists. It always will. Land that learns does not unlearn easily, but it no longer feels hungry. It feels observant, patient in a different way. Rowan still checks her shadow every day, not because she fears losing it, but because she respects what it measures. Movement, choice, becoming. And when someone new stands at the boundary, tired, hollow-eyed, drawn by the promise of quiet, Rowan does not warn them away immediately. She stands beside them. She waits. She lets the field ask its question. And then, softly, she asks her own. "Do you want rest, or do you want to live?" The answer is never quick, but when it comes, the shadow tells the truth.